My name is Bobby Brill. I am the host of Creative Mind Podcast here at the Academy. And with us today for this Afro Comic Con panel is Michael Buffington. And Michael is a graduate of the Academy of Art University, where he majored in illustration, but he is far more than that. He does game design, CG design, has done a stint with Lucasfilm, is a musician in his own right. And next to him, somewhere in the screenland, is Greg Eichholzer, who did his master's here at the Academy. And he is game designer and worked on some of the bigger games like Dragons of Atlantis, The Godfather 5 Families, and probably most important to this discussion, he is the UI UX lead and author of the UI UX track here for game design. So two experts in the game industry. So Michael and Greg, the big question, so how do you make a video game? Michael?
That is a very good question. And there are a lot of people who are watching this wondering the very same thing. A lot of us play video games. A lot of us really enjoy video games. And some of us even have dreams about making our own video games. But it seems so far away because we just don't understand how video games are made. And so what we want to do today is we want to kind of unravel the mystery of how video games are made so that you can see that it's not something that is so far-fetched that you could never do it. It's not this impossible dream, because clearly people do it all the time. And so what we want to do is we want to help you guys understand exactly what it takes to make a game, because maybe there's some role within the game development pipeline in the game industry that might be perfect for someone like you. And so we want to introduce you to all of these different things.
And Greg, that's just a ditto for you?
Well, I mean, I think Michael covered quite a bit of it there. Yeah, I think it's important that when we start to, dig our hands in and look at how video games are made and realize how collaborative it really is, that there is a role for, just about anyone that wants to get involved in it at some level. There's art roles, there's design roles, there's product management roles, there's all different kinds of possibilities for entering the game space.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important point, because some people might feel like, oh, well, if I want to get into games, I have to be a programmer. Or if I wanted to get into games, I have to be an artist. And you can be a producer. You can be a producer, a production manager. I mean, there's even, people who do music for games, but there are so many different roles, and it takes so much talent to kind of come together to form the team to produce a game, because the games are so multifaceted in terms of the needs of each particular project. So there's no one type of person that is best suited for making games. Games really require a team effort almost more than anything else. And it requires a bunch of people to come together with really one goal, is to make a really cool, really fun game.
Yeah, and fun is something that is definitely a hard thing to measure. It takes a group of people getting together and actually playing the product that they're planning on releasing to a wider audience, and actually trying to figure out what is the most fun part of the experience.
And you guys are not just talking about games, the PC games, console games, mobile games. There's the concept of gamification now in just about everything, that a lot of the stuff that you guys are teaching and helping people learn, that does apply beyond the traditional, I'm going to sit and play Xbox or Nintendo or any kind of game you want to throw in there. The gamification is part of our modern day technology and content creation now.
Absolutely. There are plenty of applications for games outside of what's traditionally thought of as an entertainment medium. The medical industry is pushing into games pretty heavily for upcoming things like virtual reality, augmented reality, to enhance training for doctors. There's all kinds of applications outside of games itself. You'll find it in advertising quite a bit. I'm sure you've already probably run into this in some of your games and ads.
Right, and that go ahead. I'm sorry, Michael. Go ahead.
With the advent of AR and VR technology, especially, it's allowed for more applications and uses of games. It's definitely not just something that kids do. It's gone far beyond Super Mario Brothers and into teaching tools. So people are really using games to help teach people important life skills and job skills and things like that. So it's games serve a purpose far beyond what they originally did, and if you can make games that not only are fun but make games that have an application like that, there's always a place for you in the industry.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I mean, even now there's virtual reality games that are being targeted toward HR training, the most, the least exciting of things you could possibly think about.
Right.
There's no Dungeons and Dragons in HR. But so, or maybe there is. I mean, maybe at a very cool company, you've got Dungeons and Dragons, but
Right.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say no. So why don't we get into the concept of actual game design? I mean, where does that start? How do you sit down and go, I'm going to make a game and it's going to do this? And then you guys look at me and go, well, what is this? How do we make this? What do you want?
Well, a better term is game development, because game design is just one aspect of the game development process. So game development is sort of the all-encompassing term that captures everything that happens within the process of making a game. And the really cool thing is, in the School of Game Development where Greg and I teach, we really teach every single function, every single job that you and role that you have in a game company within the department. So no matter what it is that you want to do in a game, you can come to the School of Game Development, you can learn that skill and then go out into the real world and get a job at a game company and do that. So it's really interesting, and we can just dive right into it, and we can start going into all these roles and talk about how they all kind of work together.
Yeah, I just want to add to what Michael is saying pretty quickly about the Academy and the School of Game Development. What makes our experience really unique is that the fact that we have every one of these paths of learning in our department, that we can actually come together and bring everybody together from all these different paths to participate in actually building a game towards that end of their academic journey. So I think that absolutely really makes it unique.
And that's just so important, because the worst thing about when you graduate is not having anything in your portfolio. I mean, that is the great thing that the Academy does do, that upon graduation, it's like, yeah, here's my game. Done.
Right.
Here's
Exactly.
I made a game. I made multiple games. Here are my games. Not I got, throw me on. I can figure it out. It's like, no, I made a game.
Yeah. Well, and they get their stuff onto Steam, and they get their stuff out in front of people actually playing it. That makes a huge difference when you're applying.
Absolutely.
Well, then let's jump into it. You guys have a PowerPoint that kind of sets up and walks us through the world of game development. Let's see what you guys have got and kind of see where we can go. And I'll be the guinea pig and ask some questions along the way that kind of goes, I don't understand what this means. Tell me what you're doing.
Good. So here, what we've done to kind of simplify things so we don't ramble on is we've just gone to Wikipedia and found a really cool, accurate definition. Video game development is the process of creating a video game. The effort is undertaken by a game developer, which may range from a single person to like the guy who made Flappy Bird, for example, to an international team dispersed across the globe, like Ubisoft, or one of these huge companies that's in multiple countries. Traditional commercial PC and console games are normally funded by a publisher like Activision or Sony. and they can take several years to reach completion. A lot of times, big AAA games will take like 3 years to make. Indie games can take less time and can be produced at a lower cost by individuals and smaller developers. So this is really a very good, succinct definition of what game development is. But the problem with this definition is that it doesn't really explain to you all of the roles and all of the effort and talents that are needed to make these games. So it talks to you a little bit about the process, but it doesn't go as in depth, and that's where we're going to step in.
And just a quick question for you guys, because there's going to be some terminology that you use that some of the people who are new to games or like me or a parent don't understand. What's a AAA game?
You want to take that one, Greg?
Sure. So you'll often hear that term AAA game, and really what that you can equate to is, like a blockbuster Hollywood movie, right? Like if you're familiar with like that big summer blockbuster, like comic book movie, that comes out that has a high production kind of cost and value to it. That's what a AAA game really is.
So these are like what? Grand Theft Auto, The Last of Us, The Rest of Us? Last of Us, okay.
Assassin's Creed, Tomb Raider.
So we're talking millions and millions of dollars in development and
right.
earning. This rivals movies at this point.
It in a lot of cases, I would say that some of these games can even be more costly than a movie production. Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
What we have here is a very cool diagram that shows some of the different functions within games and how they kind of work together. So the first one that you see here is a concept artist. Now, I am partial to concept artists because I am a concept artist and I am the concept art lead in the School of Game Development. However, the only thing that I would do different about this diagram, and as I would take the quest designer or the game designer, and I would put that first, right? Because the first thing that you need to have is a story, and you need some sort of guidance for the concept artist. But we'll get back to that. For now, we're going to jump into concept art, and I'll explain to you guys what that is. When the game designer, when the producers, when the studio comes up with an idea for a game, they come up with a story for a game, they need to visualize this. They need to create visuals and drawings and paintings of what these things look like. They hire somebody who is a concept artist. Now, a concept artist has a very special skill. They're different than a fine artist. They're different than an illustrator. Because what the concept artist's job is to do is to take that idea that the game designer has and create visuals to sort of articulate that on paper or digitally now in Photoshop and things like that. So what happens is the concept artist is really a professional visual problem solver. So they take this problem, which is, how do I take this design brief, this write-up of what this particular asset is, whether it's a character or a prop or a creature or an environment or a vehicle or a weapon. How do I take this idea that's written down and how do I put visuals to this? Well, as a professional visual problem solver, the concept artist has 4 tools: line, shape, color, and value, and they have to combine them together in ways that communicate what the game designer and what the studio wants to see out of that game. So it's a very special skill set. It's not just somebody who can draw well, paint well. It's not just somebody who can make cool illustrations. It's somebody who is really smart and can really solve problems visually, because those are the only tools that you have to do it.
And you as a concept artist yourself, I mean, the work you've done and what people can go online and look at either on the school's website or just by Google searching, concept art really has become the rock star idea of an artist in the game world, because you're really creating the entire look and visual feel, like you said, where before people were like, well, I'm really good at drawing a character. I'm really good at drawing the gun the character uses, or the spear, or the giant floating mushroom, to go back to Super Mario Brothers. But some of the stuff that you've shown me and the stuff you do, it's atmosphere, it's a feeling, it's a genre that
Absolutely
puts you into a state of mind almost that oftentimes doesn't always go into the game per se, but it gives you the starting point to world building, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, really in the very beginning stages of design, we call it pre-production. And so before they really go into production, what you're trying to do is you're trying to create the mood, the feel, the aesthetics. What does the world feel like? When I look at this, that those visuals that I see in that game should evoke certain emotions. When you look at Assassin's Creed, when you look at Dead Space, when you look at some of these different games, immediately when you start to play the game, it evokes a certain emotion in the player. The player should feel a certain way, and that happens through the aesthetics, through the visuals. So you're absolutely right. It's the concept artist's job to set the mood, to set the tone, and to set the look and feel of the game. And that's why a concept artist's role is so critical. And like I said, there may be some programmers and some character modelers and things like that might disagree with that assessment, but being biased myself because I am a concept artist, I would definitely say the concept artists are kind of like the rock stars. They're the lead singer, the lead guitarist of the production in a lot of ways, because what you see on screen ultimately was conjured up in their minds.
And Greg, we're going to get to UI UX, and you can completely burn Michael down afterwards.
Absolutely.
I'll completely set you up. I'll put it on a tee, knock it out of the park. We know. I know. Don't worry. That's what I'm here for. But so give me some examples just very quickly, because I know we don't have a whole lot of time. What are some great places to start looking for concept art? To some ideas of what concept art people should be looking for?
Well, let's if we go to the next slide, I'll kind of show some people. Actually, we are starting with game design. Okay. Why don't we do this, Greg? Why don't we skip to concept art since we were there, and we'll go back to game design in just a second. Okay. So let me give people an idea of what to look for visually. So concept art is really the second step in the game development pipeline. Like we said, once the idea is established, it's the role for the concept artist to develop that style, the color palettes, the mood, and everything that you see in a game. Now, a great place to go and see concept art is a site called ArtStation. If you go to artstation.com, just that first page right there will literally let you step into the world of concept art, and you will see everything under the sun, from characters to props to environments, and it's all mind-bogglingly good. But we have some examples here to help people understand visually what concept art is. Many of the people who are watching this know this little game called Overwatch. And they're quite familiar with this. And this is one of the characters, Farah, from Overwatch. And this is some of the original concept art that was created for this particular character. And what you see is some of the preliminary drawings, some of the exploratory drawings, and you see the end result, what the character turned out to be is very different from some of the original exploratory drawings, but that's part of the process, right? You start, you don't just draw one drawing and then the game designer and the producers and everybody, the lead artist says, great, that's it, that drawing is perfect. Usually it takes lots of drawings, lots of iterations, lots of different takes on the same idea before you can really nail down what is best for that particular asset. So this is an example of Overwatch. The next slide is another example of some Overwatch characters. Many people are familiar with Anna and Bastion. I mean, these are really cool characters within the game. And what's really cool is that what we teach in the School of Game Development is we teach people how to create artwork exactly like this. If you look at the next slide, this is an example of some character design work that was done by a student named Pei Zhang, that was a student in the School of Game Development a couple of years ago. And so you see here, this is sort of a final sort of production ready painting. And what that means is that means everything's gotten approved. The preliminary sketches have already been done. and now they've done action poses. They've done what you'll see what's called a turnaround at the upper right, and that is the front, side, back, three-quarter view and things like that, because that's what the 3D modeler needs. And then you see that final sort of hero painting where it's just everything's painted really well so that the 3D modeler can understand the textures and the things that they're looking at. So, but this is an example of student work. And you can see that this is on par with what we did or with what I just showed you from Overwatch, because that's what we do. We train people to become professional level concept artists. So let's flip through.
And just a quick question while that's coming through. You mentioned that this is separate from the 3D modeling work. So this is essentially two different artists. So these are two different paths that an artist or a student can take, where it's like, I can draw all of these great fine art masterpieces, and then a 3D modeler can go, I'm not really good at drawing, but I can take your design and turn it into a living, breathing, on-screen avatar. So those are two great paths there, correct?
Yes, and that's what's so important about what we're talking about is we're showing people that you don't just have to be a great drawer or a great painter or a great character designer to be in the games industry. That may not be something that you're really gifted at, but maybe you're really good at modeling. Maybe you just are really good at working with 3D stuff. Maybe you've taken a sculpting class and you really had a knack for it. That may be a sign that you could be a really good 3D modeler, and you may not be able to create the concept art. You may not be able to solve that visual problem and come up with that stuff out of thin air like a concept artist, but you can take those drawings and model them and turn them into something amazing that could be put into the game engine. And as you can see, one of the reasons why I chose this work was because this work is completely different from what we saw previously. And that shows that there's all different styles that you're going to be doing as a game artist. Sometimes you're going to be doing hyper realistic. Sometimes you're going to be doing super cartoony. And then there's everywhere in between. Another aspect of concept art is environment concept art, and this is the environments, right? The worlds, all the different, interior and exterior, spaces that the characters go through as they traverse the world and go on their quests. So we'll show you some examples from professional level concept artists. So this is one of my favorite. His name is Andres Roca. And I mean, this is just very, very high level, beautiful concept art that he's created. And this really sets the mood. Now, it goes much deeper than this. There's production drawings and things like that where you have to see very technical drawings of the set and of the space. But this is definitely one of those pieces that, like you mentioned, Bobby, sets the mood and the tone for the game. And there's another one right after this that's really cool as well. This is also one that really is going to just set the mood and the tone and the feeling that the player is going to have when they get into it. But what you'll see is when you look at the student work that we've produced here, it's on par with this. As a matter of fact, this particular student was so good that he was hired by Riot because of this particular work that he did while he was in school as a student. This is not work that he did professionally. This is work that he did while he was in school.
Do you ever get jealous of these students? Because that would just, it would get me.
Ironically, no, I feel like a proud papa when they get this good. When I see them go from barely, able to draw a figure to producing work like this, and then they go on into the industry and become wildly successful, it just warms my heart. That's one of the most gratifying aspects of, what we do in the school of game development.
I agree with that. I get really pumped up to hear when students I've worked with have gone on and actually gotten into the studio.
Here, this is another environment piece. And this student in particular had never painted environments before they got into my class. And this is what they were doing by week 12. So, it just goes to show you, the level, the quality of what we teach and how important it is, because this student pretty much walked out of school into a job, and you can see why. But yeah, why don't we go back to, here really quickly. These are the type of interests that would probably be an indicator that you could pursue a career in concept art. So if you really like drawing, painting, designing characters, illustrating, if you like comic books, sketching from life, figure drawing, if you like designing weapons and robots, if you're one of those kids that drew monsters and your mom was a little concerned about you, you're probably just a concept artist. And if you like designing environments or just creating the look and feel of the game, those are good indicators that you would be a really good concept artist.
It's interesting because you are talking about concept art and then game design as kind of, which comes first, the chicken or the egg. And
right.
you can see where it's like, I've got this really cool idea in my head of what it looks like. And then you've got to team up with somebody who goes, that's great. Now, how does he jump over the wall?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that you have your game designers that come up with the stories and like you said, what you're talking about, those are game mechanics.
Okay.
How does the game work? How do the characters move? What kind of weapons do they have? What are the power-ups? All these different things are important things that game designers, really have to think about. That concept art, we just have to make it look pretty, but they're the ones who have to sort of create the engine and sort of make that game work, because they're the ones who make it fun. If the game designer doesn't do their job well, it doesn't matter how pretty the game is, nobody's going to play it. One of the complaints about my son, he had about the Battlefront 2, the Star Wars game, was it was basically like one level and it wasn't really that well thought out, he said. And so he felt like there should have been more to it. So this is somebody that, is 13, 14 years old and is feeling this. And so, what that means is that there should have been a little bit more work on the front end of this to make sure that this game was fun, and then it could be fun for an extended period of time, because he didn't say that when he was playing the recent Assassin's Creed. I mean, he played that thing. I mean, he got on my nerves because all he did was play that for like 2 weeks straight. But that's because it was so fun. I mean, what would you say about game design, Greg?
Absolutely. I would say that game design, from my point of view as a UI UX person, what the game designer is really responsible for is making sure that core mechanic, that core user experience, what makes the game fun, is really thought through from start to finish. Yeah. That it makes good sense, that they've played it enough to feel like it's a rewarding mechanic and process to play the game. Without that, all of the rest of the pipeline will suffer.
Yeah,
as you said.
Well, can you walk us through then these 4 big points you have for game design? So rough architecture and flow, that seems kind of, that's hard to wrap my head around. So what do you mean by architecture and then flow of the game levels?
Do you want me to take this, Mike?
Yeah, go ahead. I mean,
sure.
And you can show them some of the work too to kind of explain that, because you done a really good job of that.
Sure. So rough architecture and flow, I mean, that's deciding, at a high level what the gameplay is going to be. If it's going to be, a side scroller, a shooter, a strategy, and then flow is that moment to moment decision. I would say, like, where does the player start in world 1-1, and how do they end up at the end of world 1-1? So they have to calculate all those little steps along the way. Game-wide systems, that's, if you think about different categories of games, right? Like RPGs or strategy or fighting or, racing games. Often there's these mechanics and things that affect the game globally, right? Like in an RPG, you might have an inventory system, right? Like that's where you're storing all of the things that you collect over the course of the gameplay.
So RPG, that's role-playing game, just
right.
To clarify, right? So that's, you're going out and collecting things.
Collecting things, you're interacting with characters, you're learning about a world through a story. So documentation and writing documentation that communicates design concepts to other members of the team. This is often referred to as a game design document, or GDD. I've heard people call it a spec sheet, or just the design brief. So that it can be referred to as a few different things. But really, this is just writing down the instructions for how to play the game, how the thing is supposed to be built. It's very important that everyone has an understanding and reads the documentation. Now, Michael and I have been in some conversations with some folks that maybe didn't want to read. Something. He's shaking his head. But
how dare you tell me what I don't want to do? Who do you think you are?
But reading a game design brief and writing it takes an incredible amount of thought to put these things together to make sure that everything is going to work as best you can. And it's what sets up the rest of the team for success, right? Like you need these things. Various tools for gameplay authoring and scripting. Yeah, so something to really kind of note and take that is important in an industry like gaming is that software is always going to be changing. We have to stay on top of what new engine is coming out, or what updates have happened to that engine, what new hardware is coming out. So we have to understand what the limitations are and what tools we have in order to effectively make a game that's modern and appealing. You always have to be in this thinking and learning mode. Even as a professional working in a studio, you have to be willing to learn. We've got some game design images here showing some of the level of drawing, because even as a game designer, you do need drawing ability to some degree. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to make as pretty of concept art like a concept artist, but your drawings need to be clear. They need to visually communicate how something is going to function, because you've probably heard the adage, picture's worth 1,000 words. So it is definitely true in the case for game design. It's often easier to explain a concept through an image than to write, a 1,000-word essay about how this is going to work. In these particular images, we're looking at some different levels of progression, right? Like we're looking at how a character can bounce along mushrooms, and then in level 2, the character has to take that knowledge of bouncing on a mushroom, combine it with their little umbrella guy to be able to float along the screen. And then by the end, you have to combine, what you've learned about bouncing off mushrooms, floating on the umbrella in the wind, and then you're adding it to getting an updraft from fire in order to progress along this level.
So, I mean, this, to me, just looking at it, it looks, I mean, if I were to take away the imagery, this is almost this is like mechanics. This is, the algebra almost of it, where it's like, it's going to jump, it's going to pop, it's going to jump up real high. If I were to take away all the imagery, it would still be understandable. And it seems almost like this is the management side of a game.
Well, yeah, I mean, the game designer, is someone who has to kind of see the vision for the gameplay through, concepting the vision for how the game is going to function and play in their head, and making sure that vision gets on screen by the end. So yeah, a lot of these types of documents and drawings help make sure that vision is carried through. Now, this is we're looking at a very far away top-down map.
Very simple. Look like you drew it on the back of a napkin. Very easy to understand.
Yeah. So, graph paper and pencil and pen can be very excellent tools for a game designer. Especially if you have to calculate, how much space, like virtual space, is a game is going to take up. Like, if you think about games like Grand Theft Auto that are, virtually miles and miles of a city in landscape, somebody had to sit down and draw out and figure out how that whole map is laid out and how much virtual space it's actually going to take up. So that's kind of what we're looking at here. And it's got like a nice legend over here with all of the symbols that are being used defined. Again, like this is a super valuable tool for many people in the production pipeline. So Michael, what would you say that a concept artist would gain from reading and understanding this map? What would they do with it?
Well, see, what's important about this is, we would look at this and it would give us a sense of, let's say they're talking about a particular area on this map. We would see what the player path is. We would see what's happening in context. See, we don't just see this isolated space. We see how it relates to the rest of the world. And so that really influences how we design that space. So we look at it and go, okay, I see how this connects here. Okay, so it should feel like this and this and this. So having this kind of information is invaluable when we're trying to conjure up these images. And it also helps us, it's really a huge benefit for us because it helps us get inside the designer's head pretty easily when we see stuff like this. So, and then, a 3D, an environment modeler, which we'll talk about next, can take this and model this, based on this and the concept art, and they can build that model in 3D so that they can put it into the engine. So, but let's look at what kind of skills it would, or interest might mean that you would be a good game designer.
Right. So no surprise, you enjoy playing games, right? You have to enjoy playing games, and you probably, I would say, like playing games with other people, right? You enjoy figuring out the functionality behind things like puzzles and games. Like you're curious about how things work. So you may also like storytelling. Often game designers are also storytellers. Now that doesn't mean that every single game, has a deep story to it, but you do like to tell some stories and creating worlds.
The next in the pipeline after game design, after concept art, is 3D modeling, and that's something that is also really interesting. We mentioned it before, but 3D modeling is when you take the characters, the environments, the props that are drawn, that are first, thought up by the game designers. They're conjured up image-wise by the concept artist. The modelers take that information and then they actually build it in a 3D program. And so they rig it, they create meshes, they light it, they texture it and make it look real, and then they put it into that game engine. So let's look at some work from a 3D modeler. So this is from the game Injustice. This is a 3D character modeling, because there's several different types of modelers, right? There's people who specialize in characters, because that's very, very difficult. You need to know anatomy very well and things like that. There's people who specialize in doing props, because you'd be surprised how many props need to be modeled. And then there's people who do environments. But this is an example of character modeling. And you can see this is some work from a student. You can see how on par it is with professional level 3D character modeling.
What are some of those programs that even if somebody's in junior high, high school, or just thinking about a second career in this, some programs they should start thinking about? Is it ZBrush, or is it 3D Studio Max, or what is it, Softimage from back in the day? What are some programs they should be thinking about for 3D modeling?
What they use in the industry a lot, they use a lot of ZBrush, a lot of Maya, and there's some other ones like Mudbox and Modo and things like that. But really, what is fast becoming an industry standard is this program called Blender. And Greg is the Blender master. And the reason why that program is becoming a standard very quickly is because it's free. And it will always be free according to the creators of the program. And it's just becoming more powerful every year. And more people are using Blender as their primary 3D modeling software because A, it's free, and B, it can do almost anything that some of these bigger programs can do and almost as good. And so if I were in high school and I were really serious about 3D modeling, I wouldn't even worry about getting some of these more expensive $1,000 programs. I would go and get Blender and just learn that because I imagine in 5 years, most people in the industry are going to be using Blender.
Yeah, I do hear a lot more of our colleagues getting into it, and I think that's a really good thing. Just to be clear, like Michael said, Maya and some of these other softwares are still like standard, and we do teach those. But yeah, like you can't beat the price of free.
Right,
especially when you're just starting out and learning.
Sure.
And what's great about learning on a free software like Blender is that so many of those skills and concepts are transferable. Like I've said, in our industry, software is always changing. Things are always changing. So, but process and the working knowledge that you need in order to operate the software and the drawing and practical skills that you need to do it, those are the constants.
So there really is no barrier to getting into video games at this point. You really can jump into it relatively simply.
Yeah, at this point, you could download Blender for free, and then you can go download Unity and Unreal Engine for free. And the Epic is actually a big supporter of Blender now, and with one of their mega grants. So that's pretty exciting news for them. But yeah, like there's no real, other than having access to a computer.
Well, yeah. Michael, is there more 3D stuff you want to show us?
Yeah, let's look at some 3D environment modeling stuff. So this is also a sample from the game Overwatch, and you can see how nice this looks. And when you look at samples from our student work, you can see how on par it is with this stuff. Yeah, this is an example of student work from Spring Show a few years ago. Let's see if there are a couple more examples. It's also example from Spring Show a few years ago. And every year they're creating lots of cool stuff. I mean, if you are interested in drawing, sculpting, 3D modeling software, things like that, that's definitely a sign that you probably would make a really good 3D modeler. Beyond 3D modeling, there are other functions within game development, and one of those is one that's near and dear to Greg Eichholzer's heart.
This is the one that it seems to be the fastest growing industry right now for literally everything we touch, right? That's UI and UX design. I mean, there's nothing that doesn't involve UI or UX design. So, Greg, what's UI, what's UX? Go for it.
Okay, so, all right. UI, UX literally translates into user interface and user experience design. So that is, figuring out how an interaction with whatever device you're using should feel, and then UI, user interface art, how it should look, right? So how it should feel and how it should look. within user interface and user experience design, you have to have a little bit of an understanding of human-computer interaction, little psychology, visual communication, and graphic design. So you still need to be able to draw, and you definitely need to understand some of the game mechanics. Ultimately, because user interface and user experience design in games is a support role, much like concept art and everything else is supporting that game design document, right? Like all of our work has to support the overall vision of the game and how it should work and how it should feel. So what do these different roles do? So a user experience designer, this is a person that is in charge of taking those game design documents and figuring out what exactly the game designer intends the player to do on a particular screen or a particular part of the game, and then creating a flow chart for what that player may be going through step by step in that process, right? Like if you're playing one of your favorite mobile games, right? Like Clash Royale, right?
Of course. Best game ever.
So if you're playing Clash Royale, some user experience designer had to sit down and figure out step by step what a player is going to go through in order to start a match in that game, in order to build their deck of cards in that game. And, one of the other important functions, figuring out how to get a person from point A to B and purchasing those gems, right? So that is something that a user experience designer is doing. They're also designing those interactions around what feels best for whatever device you're playing on, whether that's a phone, whether that's a console, right? Because in console gaming, that controller is part of your user experience, right? It's part of your interface. And PC games, right? Like your keyboard and your mouse are part of your user experience in the interface. So they have to think about where the player is, what they're playing on, and then they conduct testing often for the game. So they're trying to figure out if their hypothesis of how an interaction should work and feel actually pans out the way that they thought it would.
So how do we simplify that?
I was going to say, because Michael, can you simplify it? Because I mean, it's
yeah.
I mean, good.
I'll put it. I'll take everything that he just said, and I'll explain it in my definition. Okay. So it makes all the buttons in the game look really pretty, and it shows you what buttons to press so that you can play the thing that you want to play. So hit this button, that means start, and then this button means exit. And that's what it means, because if you can't figure that out when you're playing the game, it's going to get really frustrating and you're going to be like, this game sucks, right? And because bad UI and bad UX design can literally make or break your game. You could have a great game, but with crappy UI UX, it's going to be a bad game, period, because people aren't going to enjoy playing it. They're going to get frustrated. And I know there's plenty of games like that. And, Clash Royale recently, because it's the best game ever, they made one small change to their UI and everybody got, up in arms because it was like really confusing, and they had to go and fix it really quickly because they don't want to lose players. So that's basically what Greg meant with what he just said.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, I think the easier one, not to take away from all the smart stuff that Greg said, but because he and I talked about this before, and I was like, words, math words, I don't remember, but a really old universal remote, and you just thumb swiping on your phone. If your 3-year-old can work your phone, then it's got good UI. Right. You give me a universal remote, it's just me banging the universal remote on the table over and over again until I change the channel.
Right.
All right. Yeah.
UI UX. So UI UX is for very, very. It's a higher level of thinking.
Well, I mean,
It's
critical thinking.
It's critical thinking. It's thinking at that top down way of looking at things.
Yeah, like you have to. There's a lot of things you're trying to consider, right? Like what people are playing on, what group of people is part of the audience, right? Like age group and things can make a huge difference in the types of decisions you have to make. There's just it's a set of complicated problems, but if you like working with people and testing out ideas, you're probably going to like creating user experience.
Well, show them a couple examples of what UI. I mean, I know we've talked about it, but show them some examples of what that looks like.
Sure. So we'll skip ahead here. So if you've played the game Dead Space, you're now familiar with some really interesting UI UX concepts, right? Like in this game, there's a lot of interface that's actually part of the game world, and then interface that's meant to look like meant for the player, right? Like now in Dead Space, we've got a health bar built right into the back of the character, right? That's pretty intuitive, right? Because you are closely associating something really important, like how close is my character to being dead, directly onto the character itself, rather than off to the side of the screen somewhere. Which doesn't make sense for every game, but it made really great sense for this game because it heightens that anxiety around keeping your character alive, because this game is a kind of a sci-fi horror type of game.
Just to quickly interrupt, and that's an interesting point you brought up, where you're changing someone's emotions and feelings and anxiety level through the UI, where it's not necessarily bad UI. No. It's a UI that is grabbing you, as opposed to, oh, well, right up here's my little lifeline, and as I get deader and deader and deader, it's here. But here, it's like right here. It's right here. It's coming to get me. I'm panicking, and that's an emotional connection with your game.
Right. You have to have a certain level of empathy for the player and for what they're supposed to be feeling. And that's going to help you make a better decision about where to place certain UI elements to evoke the right kind of emotion. Because, if you were to separate the life bar away from the character and put it somewhere else on the screen, that distance, physical distance on the screen and distance in immersion, right? So we're moving it one step away from the character, makes it not as critical feeling as when you more closely associate it. So association, proximity, some of these design elements that that even concept art kind of shares, right? Like proximity, balance, design, those things also affect your UI art. So this is some student work, and I wanted to focus in on the flow chart here. This is often a step that I feel people overlook when considering user experience in UI design, is that from a game design document to getting to something that looks prettier, this is a very necessary step in actually solving how something functions. You can do a lot of really great problem solving at this fidelity of visualization, just figuring out step to step where things are. So if we look from here, so after a flow chart is completed, often it goes to a what's called a wireframe. So this is where you're taking all those steps and just doing a gray box design because you're just focusing on function.
Now, I just want to jump in here real quick.
Sure.
I know to everybody watching, this might sound a little boring, but I just want to let you know that this is incredibly important to the game development process, because everything that Greg is talking about, if this is not executed well, your game's going to suck. So, it's really, everything that he's talking about is really, really important. And it's something, this is why the role within the game development process is so important, because it's such a critical part of what happens when you play the game.
And I think if you don't believe either of these two guys, go on Google Play or go on the App Store and get a half-rated star game and spend 5 minutes with it, and you'll see exactly what UI UX is. Because I think, Greg, as you explained it to me before, good UX and good UI versus bad UX and UI, it's night and day. And
absolutely,
you'll understand right away just how important, as Michael was saying,
the way. Yeah, the way I explain that quickly is that in a good game, in a good gameplay experience, you don't even notice that the UI is there.
And that's the point.
Right? Like, in a bad game, all you can do is complain about, like, well, I had to, go through 6 menus and hold the button down for 2.5 minutes to,
right.
Or old video games where the A button should be jump, but that game just switched it to D-pad up, and that would drive me nuts. It's like A should be jump. Right?
Well, as you can see, Greg really knows this stuff, and Greg is going to do a talk later on in the day specifically about UI UX, and like I said, it's an important function within games. It's in demand big time. So if any of this stuff looks like something that you think is cool or that you would want to do, you should definitely attend his talk, where he is going to get into it in depth and really talk about everything that goes into it. But we have a couple other things to get to before our time runs out, because there's some other aspects of game development that are really important. So we want to move on to those and kind of show you some of the other things that you can do within games as well. Programming is so important to games that they probably get paid more money than anybody in the game development pipeline, because it's like having a really pretty car with really nice rims and a nice paint job and a nice sound system, but the car has no gas in it, right? The car has no engine. It's nothing but a shell, right? Your game, no matter how well done the 3D modeling, the concept art, the UI, UX, if there's no programmer to make this thing run, then you've really got no game. And so they really do all this stuff, and not everybody needs to learn how to draw or paint to be in game development. If you're really good at math and you like, solving problems and things like that, then programming is something that could really, really be a good role for you. And, so not everybody in the game development process has to be super artsy. Some of it is very technical, and this is one of those areas. And that's literally all I have to say about it, because all I can do is draw. I draw it and they make it move. So why don't we?
But there are some really good programming guests coming up too. So there's definitely a lot of good stuff up there.
They will explain to you. I mean, some of these talks that we have coming up about programming are going to do much more justice to it than I did. But I'm just giving you the gist of it. If you like math, then you will be a great programmer.
So tell us then the producer and the roles of a game.
Well, what a producer does is they kind of oversee the whole pipeline, and they make sure that your game gets done. For example, you need a manager, you need a supervisor to make sure that everybody's doing their job, to make sure that everybody's meeting their deadlines, that everybody's hitting their milestones. You need to make sure everybody has the things that they need, down to whether or not their seat is ergonomically correct, and whether or not everybody has food because everybody's staying late because there's a milestone that needs to be hit. Like, a producer's job is very, very important. And so it's so important that they do get paid well as well. because they sort of oversee the pipeline and make sure that everything goes smoothly. And having a good producer can make the difference between a good game development experience and a bad one. That's how important the role is. And speaking, I mentioned salary a couple of times, and this is a survey from Gamasutra, a game development website. And it, this is a little old, but things haven't changed much. I mean, maybe the salaries have gone up a little bit, but this will give you a general idea, because I know a lot of people are watching this saying, I want to get into games, but my parents, they don't think that I can make any money and that this can actually be a viable career. And so what I want to show you really quickly is just how much you can actually make. Now, here for programmers and engineers, it says the average salary is $93,000. Let me tell you that that's probably more of like a beginning salary. That's something that you might be making very early on. But high-level programmers are making well into the six figures, and sometimes just stupid amounts of money. Sometimes I wish I would have paid more attention in algebra class. Unfortunately, I was too busy doodling in my sketchbook and getting kicked out of class. But that's besides the point. Now, artists and animators, those are your 3D modelers, your concept artists, your game animators, your technical artists, your UI UX artists. This is an average salary. I would say this is more like a low end sort of entry level salary for most people filling those roles, because a senior level concept artist makes well into the six figures, maybe 120, somewhere around there. Art directors might make somewhere higher than that, 130, 140, maybe even 150. And I know that senior level, what does a senior level UI UX person make? What do you think?
So I mean, that, depending on experience, can be 90 to 120,
Unless you work at Google, then it's like 175.
Well, yeah, if you're at Google, probably like 170.
Well, but that's a good question for you. That's a really good question for you guys. Just in the time period we're at, how much of this can be done outside of the big cities, or is this done everywhere? Or do you need to think about where you want to live, and do we want to talk about that?
Yeah, I can talk about that for a minute. So, the Bay Area certainly is, a hub for like mobile game development. There's well over 200 mobile game studios in the Bay Area. There's also some of the AAA big studios represented in the Bay Area. We've got Ubisoft and EA and Sledgehammer and 2K, like a bunch of big game companies in the Bay. But game studios are all over the place, all over the United States, all across the world. And I feel like in the particular climate that we're in right now, a lot more places are looking for remote workers, because it is possible to do this type of work remotely. I won't say that working remotely could ever totally replace the experience of sitting next to the people that you'd be handing off your assets to, but it's the technology that we have right now allows us to work pretty well remotely.
Definitely. And that's one of the benefits of an industry like this, is that you don't need to be in the same space like factory workers, for example. But we're getting close to the end. Why don't we wrap up and just kind of touch on the last couple of sort of salaries here. We have game designers who make salaries that are comparable to artists. Producers, obviously, we talked about how important their role is. They make a fair amount in the industry. And then we have finally QA tester, that's sort of an entry-level position. Now, just to be clear, that doesn't mean that you go in there and play video games all day. That means you try to break the video game. You're trying to find problems and bugs, and you're writing reports, and you're doing stuff like that. So if you think that you're just going in there and playing a game, that's actually not what that is. And then, of course, you have audio people, and those are the people who make sound effects and, of course, your music for the games. But the reason why we brought this up is because we wanted to arm all of you who are potentially interested in a career in game development with the information, so that when you go and talk to your parents about it, you can say, hey, mom, dad, like, I want to do this. And they'll say, you're crazy. You can't make any money making games. You can say, actually, and you can show them, how it's definitely possible to not only make money, but to make good money doing something crazy fun. It gets stressful, but to be totally honest with you, when you're working in games, our worst days are better than some people's best days. So, it's a great industry. It's a lot of fun. You make games that make people happy or help teach people. And, it's a really, really cool thing to be a part of. And both Greg and I, having been a part of the industry for a very long time, can both speak to that. And I don't think he does. And I know I certainly don't regret my choice to be involved in the game industry in the way that I am. So I hope that was interesting to you guys. And I hope that that maybe you'll think about getting involved in games if this sounds like something that is exciting to you.